Hi and welcome back. So continuing on with the laying out of our UV map, now we've laid everything out, everything is all nice and neat, everything's got a texel density that's pretty much the same. What we need to do now is pack it. So when we open up our UV editor, we have a checkered area. This is the one-to-one square that we need to make sure that everything fits into. So this part's a bit like working with a jigsaw puzzle. We want to make sure that everything is together. So we want them to be close, but we don't want them to be touching, because when we create our texture, we want to have a buffer between each of the shells. This is to ensure that when mipping occurs in the engine, which it does, you won't start to see parts of maybe the boot texture come in onto her pants or onto her skin or something like that. So we want to keep them close, but we still want to have a buffer between them. The idea, of course, when we're laying out these, we're packing these together, is to focus on the areas that get the most attention. So our face is going to have more room than the boots, for example, because we focus on, when we play our game, we focus on the character's face or the clothing of our characters. So areas that aren't going to be seen much, like the inside of the mouth, the teeth, the tongue, the bottom of the boot, don't need as much space as, say, the face or the shirt or the pants or things like that. So we need to pay attention to these things when we're packing our UVs. Now we've got two separate maps for our character. We've got one for the head and one for the body. So we don't need to worry too much about the head taking up too much room and taking space away from other areas of our clothing. With that in mind, I'm going to start to lay out all of these and pack them together, keeping in mind which areas should have the most texture space. So things like the arms, the pants, the shirt, the hands will need a bit of space, but they don't need as much space, and we should keep our hands and the arms to have the same textile density through the whole thing. So if we shrink our arm, we should shrink our hand as well. Same with the fingers. So everything that is attached should have about the same textile density where we can manage it. But areas like the bottom of the boot, the inside of the mouth, her teeth, we can shrink these right up and fill in gaps with them, basically. So we want to use our UV space to the optimum capacity, I guess would be the right way of saying it. We don't want to have massive gaps between each shell. We don't want them to be sitting on top of each other. Make sure though, when you're selecting your arm and your hand, since it's a mirrored UVs, that you select both together. So just using your marquee tool to grab both elements. So those will be sitting on top of each other inside the UV map so that they share the same UV space. This, of course, it allows us to give more room to that arm. So instead of having both arms sharing more, the space, we can double the space of one arm and share it with the other. So I'm just going to continue through and pack all of these UVs together. So again, just a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. Just make sure that you keep enough space between each shell that you can have a bit of a bleed from the texture. So when we texture it, we won't be texturing it straight onto, stopping at the end of the wireframe. We'll be going over a little bit. Again, this is to prevent seaming, and will help when mipping occurs in engine. So I might speed this video up a little bit here as well. Here, in order to best use the space, I've decided to straighten out the belt. And so since it's just a tube basically that goes around the body, we're not going to see it much, it's hidden by clothing, we can just straighten it out, and then that way it can sit right here on the side and we won't have to worry about it taking up too much space. So just rotating it into position, so just using the tools on the side to rotate where necessary, and again just bringing the buckle right down. Since it's a buckle, it's not going to need much room, it's not a focal point. The pants of course are a focal point, so we try to use as much room as we can with those, and fitting them as best we can as well. So all just like a big jigsaw puzzle, all trying to find its right spot. So areas like the inside of the vest, they don't, again, it doesn't need much room because it's inside. There's not going to be a lot of detail on this area, so we can shrink that right back as well. Okay, almost done. With our tongue in place, just filling this little gap here, we can call our body UVs done. So you can see how I've tried to utilize as much space as possible, but there is still a gap between each shell. With that done, we can now move on to our head. So we can hide that one, but you can see in the viewport how the UVs are all nice and neat. There's a reasonable text cell density between each part, and it's ready for texture, so that's excellent. So we'll bring back our head and we'll do the same for that. Okay, so I've also organized the elements on these two maps to allow for alpha. So the strips on our hair, and the outer shell of the eye will all have an alpha applied, and so we don't have too many alpha maps in game. It's always best to put as many elements as we can on the one texture. So since the body had no alpha, I'm going to put all the alpha elements into the head texture. So starting that, we'll bring down the face, and since again the face is one of the focal points of a character, we want it to take up about a quarter of the texture space here. So I'm going to bring that down, and basically won't move it once I've got it into a position that I like and then I'm happy with. So again, don't butt it up right against the edge of the square, the checker square. You do want a gap between each one. Okay, and again, just like the body, we'll start to try and fit these pieces together. Now you can see with the hair strips down there in the bottom right corner that I've actually kind of sorted them by size, and so there are several strips occupying the same space. This will allow us to use the one texture for a couple of strips, and we won't have to spend all our time texturing hair. So again, I will speed the video up here while I pack the UVs. Okay, so you can see here again, I'm going to try and sort these by size. Just separating them and then trying to get them all in. If they're around the same size, I'm going to try and put them on top of each other, or at least keep them close together so that it'll make it easier for me to texture. So with my element enabled, I'm going to do a marquee selection to make sure that I get both the top and the bottom, since they're resting on top of each other, and move them into something that's similar. See, so with that one, I'm putting it on top because it's about a similar size, and same with this one. So I'm just trying to find the spaces where I can share UVs to save space in the actual map itself. Now, it'll depend on what kind of engine you use as to whether or not you can do this sort of thing. Some engines don't like mirroring UVs. Some engines don't like, sharing spaces. So it'll all depend. But since this is going into UDK, we can definitely mirror our UVs and have them share the same space. With that done, we can scale them back since it's not going to use a lot of room, and continue to pack our UVs. So with the head mesh and the hair, the ponytail, the main sections, they are one of the bigger focuses on the head too. So if you're always looking at the character from behind, you're always looking at the back of the head. So we want to have a decent amount of space for both the ponytail and for the main hair mesh. With these parts on the inside of the ponytail, they're not going to be seen much, so we can shrink them down a bit and use them to fill one of the gaps. Okay, so just shifting the head slightly to fit in some of these objects, and then I'm going to start to put in the strips. So I'm going to keep them together. Again, this will be easier for when I texture it. It won't always be possible. Obviously, we don't have room to keep them all on one side, so where possible we'll keep chunks of them together, so it'll just make it easier on us when we start to lay down colour. With this shell of the eye, since it's just the outside of the shell, so it's the transparent part, we don't need a lot of texture space for this, so we can just shrink it back and make it just fill a hole. Since it's more transparent, it doesn't have colour, we're just using it for the shine of the eye. Okay, now with that done, we can bring back both parts of the body and we can attach them, weld all the verts together, mirror over the boot of course, and we are ready to texture, so she's good to go.